We have a warrant for Shanice Gordon. We have reason to believe she's employed at this firm.
I don't care what warrant you have. You're not approaching any of my associates without a judicial warrant and proper authorization.
We're federal agents. Step aside or we'll charge you with obstruction.
Actually, you need proper legal authority. This is a private workplace. We have employee privacy laws, firm protocols, and...
It was a normal Tuesday morning at the Morrison & Associates law firm when two ICE agents walked into the lobby demanding access to the upper floors. They had a target, a black female lawyer named Diana Chen, who worked on the fourth floor. What these agents didn't know is that they had chosen the worst possible place to attempt an illegal detention. Because this wasn't just any office. This was a firm specializing in civil rights and immigration law. And every inch of that building was equipped with security cameras that would capture every second of what was about to happen. What was recorded that day would shock the entire country and end with destroyed careers and a federal lawsuit that would change the rules forever. Before we continue with this insane story, tell me something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button because stories like this need to be told. You won't want to miss what happens in the next few minutes. Diana Chen was 32 years old and one of the most brilliant lawyers at Morrison & Associates. The daughter of immigrants who came from China in the 80s, she had grown up watching her parents struggle to build a life in the United States. They worked 16-hour days at a small restaurant. Diana studied on a full scholarship, graduated with honors from law school, and dedicated her career to helping other immigrant families navigate the complex American legal system. She wasn't just good at what she did, she was exceptional. Over the past 3 years, Diana had won 47 out of 52 cases she took on, saving families from deportation and helping people achieve their dreams of citizenship. On that Tuesday in March, she was in her office preparing documents for an important hearing when her assistant knocked on the door with a worried expression. There were two men in the ground floor reception asking for her. They weren't clients. They were federal ICE agents. The assistant said they were demanding Diana come down immediately to answer questions. Diana felt her stomach tighten. She knew exactly what this meant. Someone had made a false report claiming she was in the United States illegally. It was a tactic that white supremacists and anti-immigration groups had been using to harass lawyers who defended immigrants. Making false reports to ICE knowing it would cause terror and disruption. What these agents and whoever sent them didn't know is that Diana Chen was a natural-born American citizen, born in Los Angeles, California. Her parents had had green cards for over 30 years. She had every right to be there, but that didn't matter to people who saw her last name and her face and assumed she didn't belong in this country. Diana didn't go down. Instead, she called the firm's senior partner, James Morrison, a veteran lawyer of 58 years who had spent 4 decades fighting civil rights cases. Morrison personally went down to the lobby. And what the security cameras captured from that moment would become crucial evidence in the federal lawsuit that would come later. The lobby security cameras captured everything in high definition. James Morrison stepped out of the elevator at 10:47 a.m., his posture upright and confident like someone who had faced abusive authorities hundreds of times before. The two ICE agents were standing near the reception desk, one of them with his hand resting on his belt near his weapon, the other holding a tablet. Morrison walked directly up to them, and the first thing out of his mouth was a simple but devastating question. "Do you have a judicial warrant?" The older agent, who would later be identified as Thomas Rickman, a 15-year ICE veteran, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. That hesitation said everything. He responded that they had reason to believe an employee of this firm was illegally employed and that they needed to speak with her immediately. Morrison repeated the question, this time slower, emphasizing each word. "Do you have a judicial warrant?" The answer was no. They didn't have a warrant. They had an administrative detention order, which isn't the same thing and didn't give them authority to enter private property without consent. Morrison crossed his arms and calmly declared that without a warrant signed by a judge, they had no permission to go upstairs, no permission to interrogate anyone, and definitely no permission to detain any employee of this firm. He said this with the cold confidence of someone who knew the law better than the agents themselves. Rickman tried to intimidate. He stepped forward, raised his voice slightly, and said that interfering with federal agents was a crime. Morrison didn't back down an inch. He responded that knowing your constitutional rights and exercising them wasn't interference, it was citizenship. And then he said something that made Rickman go pale. You've been recorded since the moment you entered this building, every word, every movement. So, I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next. The second agent, younger, later, identified as Derek Foster, tried a different approach. He said this didn't need to be difficult, that they just wanted to ask some questions, verify some documents. Morrison asked if Diana was being accused of any crime. Foster admitted no. Morrison asked if there was any evidence she was in the United States illegally. Foster said they had received information. Morrison asked from whom. Foster said it was confidential. And then Morrison dropped the bomb that would change everything. He informed the agents that Diana Chen was a natural-born American citizen, born on American soil, and that any attempt to detain her without probable cause constituted a massive violation of her constitutional rights. Can you imagine the agents' expressions at that moment? The security cameras captured it perfectly. Rickman and Foster exchanged glances, the kind of look people exchange when they realize they've made a terrible mistake. But instead of backing down, instead of admitting the error and leaving, they doubled down. Rickman said they still needed to verify this personally. Morrison responded that they were welcome to submit a formal request through appropriate legal channels, but that there would be no verification happening in that building that day. The tension in the lobby was palpable. Employees who were passing by stopped to watch. The receptionist had her phone ready to call 911 if necessary. That's when Rickman made the mistake that would cost him his career. He declared they were going up anyway, with or without cooperation. Morrison physically blocked the path to the elevators, not touching the agents, but making it clear they would have to go through him. And then he said the words that would go viral when the video leaked weeks later. If you go up without a warrant, you'll be committing trespassing, civil rights violations, and I will personally ensure both of you are sued for every last penny you have. Test me. What happened in the next 10 minutes was a masterclass in how to exercise constitutional rights against authorities who are used to intimidating people into submission. Rickman pulled out his radio and called for backup, claiming he was encountering resistance from a civilian. Morrison immediately pulled out his own phone and called the ACLU's legal department, putting the call on speakerphone so everyone could hear. In less than 2 minutes, an ACLU lawyer was on the line, confirming that the agents had no legal authority to enter without a warrant, and that any attempt to do so would result in immediate legal action. Foster, the younger agent, began to look extremely uncomfortable. He whispered something to Rickman, probably suggesting they back down, but Rickman was visibly ego-bruised. He had been challenged in front of witnesses, recorded on camera, and now had ACLU lawyers involved. Instead of admitting defeat gracefully, he made his second fatal mistake. He accused Morrison of harboring a criminal and said he would report this to his superiors. Morrison, without losing his cool for a second, responded that he would be happy to speak with any supervisor who wanted to discuss how their agents tried to violate the constitutional rights of an American citizen. Meanwhile, on the 4th floor, Diana was watching everything through the office's internal security cameras. She was surrounded by other firm lawyers, all ready to go down if the situation escalated. A colleague, Sarah Mitchell, a 45-year-old white lawyer specializing in criminal defense, was holding Diana's hand. She could see that Diana was shaking, not from fear, but from pure anger. Diana had dedicated her entire life to this country, had sworn to protect and defend the Constitution, and now was being treated like a criminal based on nothing but her last name and appearance. Sarah told her not to go down, that Morrison had everything under control, but Diana wanted to confront them face to face. 3 minutes later, 2 more ICE agents arrived as backup. But what they found wasn't the scene Rickman had described over the radio. There was no hostile situation. There was a lawyer calmly defending his client's rights, surrounded by security cameras and with the ACLU on the phone. The supervising agent who arrived, a woman named Jennifer Cole with 22 years of experience, assessed the situation immediately. She pulled Rickman and Foster aside and had an intense whispered conversation that the cameras captured, but whose audio was inaudible. From the body language, it was clear Cole was furious with her subordinates. Cole approached Morrison and apologized for the misunderstanding. She said her agents had acted based on incorrect information and that they would be leaving the building immediately. Morrison asked if she could provide the name of whoever had made the false report about Diana. Cole said she would investigate internally, but couldn't disclose that information at the moment. Morrison then made it clear that Morrison and Associates would be filing a formal complaint against ICE, against Rickman and Foster specifically, and that they would be seeking all records related to this detention attempt through FOIA requests. Cole just nodded, knowing there was no possible defense for what had happened. But the story didn't end there. After the agents left the building, Morrison went up to the 4th floor where Diana was waiting. He hugged her, something he rarely did with employees, and said he was sorry she had to go through this. Diana, with tears of anger in her eyes, said she didn't just want an apology. She wanted justice. She wanted these agents to face real consequences, and she wanted whoever had made the false report exposed and held accountable. Morrison smiled, that smile of someone who's about to go into full war mode, and said that was exactly what they were going to do. Morrison and Associates didn't waste any time. Within 48 hours, they had compiled all security footage, transcribed every word of the confrontation, and prepared a formal 47-page complaint detailing every violation committed by the Iowa CE agents. But Morrison knew a simple administrative complaint would likely be buried in bureaucracy and never lead to real consequences. So he did something smarter. He strategically leaked the security camera video to investigative journalists at 3 major media outlets simultaneously, ensuring the story couldn't be suppressed. The video exploded on social media within 24 hours. Millions of people watched Morrison blocking the agents, defending Diana without backing down an inch, citing the Constitution with the precision of someone who had memorized it decades ago. The comments were overwhelmingly in favor of Diana and the firm. People were outraged that an American citizen lawyer could be targeted like this. Civil rights organizations, lawyer groups, even some politicians started speaking publicly about the case. The hashtag #JusticeForDiana was trending nationally. ICE was forced to issue a statement saying they were investigating the incident, but everyone knew this was just damage control. Meanwhile, Morrison's legal team was working on another front. They submitted FOIA requests demanding all documents related to Diana's investigation, including who had made the initial report. ICE tried to block the requests, claiming national security and informant confidentiality, but Morrison countered with a court motion, arguing that when a report is proven false and results in rights violations, the informant loses confidentiality protections. The judge partially agreed and ordered ICE to release redacted documents. What these documents revealed was shocking, but not surprising. The report had been made by a group called Citizens for Legal Immigration, an organization known for its connections to white supremacist movements. The group had created a website where they encouraged people to report suspicious immigration lawyers to ICE, claiming these lawyers were probably illegal immigrants themselves. They had a list with photos and names of lawyers, most of them people of color, who worked on immigration cases. Diana was on that list. The website included instructions on how to make anonymous reports to ICE in a way that would sound legitimate. It was essentially a guide for systematic harassment of lawyers through federal agencies. When this information became public, the outrage reached another level. It wasn't just about Diana anymore. It was about a coordinated scheme to weaponize ICE against lawyers who defended immigrants. Morrison expanded the lawsuit. In addition to suing the individual agents and ICE, he added Citizens for Legal Immigration as defendants, alleging conspiracy to violate civil rights and malicious use of government processes. The organization tried to hide behind the First Amendment, claiming they had the right to express concerns about immigration. But Morrison demonstrated that making intentionally false reports isn't protected speech, it's fraud. And when you use those false reports to harass people based on race and ethnicity, it becomes a hate crime. The lawsuit was transforming into something much bigger than justice for one person. It was becoming a test case about accountability, about how extremists weaponize government systems, and about how to protect professionals who defend the vulnerable. Rickman and Foster were suspended without pay while an internal ICE investigation was underway. But the internal investigation was a joke. Everyone knew it was being conducted to protect the agency, not to find the truth. Morrison didn't trust that process one bit. He began interviewing other immigration lawyers and discovered that at least 8 others had been targets of similar intimidation attempts by ICE agents in the past 2 years. All were people of color. All worked on immigration cases, and in several cases, the agents had used the same tactics: show up without a warrant, make illegal demands, try to intimidate through threats of detention. Morrison realized he had in his hands not just a case of misconduct, but evidence of a systematic pattern of discrimination. 6 months after the office incident, the case had transformed into a class action representing 23 immigration lawyers who had been targets of similar harassment. Morrison brought on board 3 other firms specializing in civil rights litigation, creating a legal team that ICE and the Department of Justice couldn't ignore. Depositions began, and what came out of them was devastating for the defense. Rickman, under oath, admitted he had never verified whether Diana was an American citizen before going to the office. He admitted the only information he had was an anonymous report from a website he had never investigated. He admitted he knew he didn't have a warrant, but thought he could intimidate the office into cooperating anyway. Foster, the younger agent, fell apart completely during his deposition. He cried, admitted he knew what they were doing, was wrong, but that Rickman was his supervisor and he was afraid to question orders. He revealed that Rickman had a reputation within the agency for being too aggressive, especially with Asian and Latino targets. He said other agents avoided working with Rickman because they knew he would eventually cross a line that would get them in trouble. Foster's deposition was so damaging to ICE that the agency's lawyers tried to seal the testimonies, but the judge denied it, saying the public had a right to know how their federal agents were operating. ICE's internal investigation finally concluded, and surprisingly, it was harsher than Morrison expected. Rickman was formally fired for serious misconduct and procedure violations. Foster received a 90-day suspension without pay and was placed on probation. But what really shocked was the internal report admitting the agency had failed to adequately train its agents on constitutional limitations, and that there was a culture within certain divisions that encouraged aggressive actions without proper supervision. It was a rare and damning admission from a federal agency. Morrison used this report as central evidence in the civil lawsuit. Meanwhile, Diana's life had changed drastically. She became an involuntary public figure, recognized on the streets, invited to speak at law schools about civil rights, and how to respond when authorities exceed their authority. She hated the attention, but understood her story had power. In an interview she gave to a major news network, Diana spoke emotionally about how that day made her question everything. She said she had spent her whole life believing that if you followed the rules, worked hard, were a good citizen, you would be treated with dignity. But on that day, none of that mattered. All that mattered was her face, her last name, and the assumptions people made about her based on that. The trial was scheduled to begin in October, but 3 weeks before the date, the federal government made a settlement offer. It was substantial, $7 million to be divided among the 23 plaintiffs, with Diana receiving the largest individual portion of $1.2 million. But the money wasn't even close to the most important part of the settlement. The settlement included mandatory policy changes throughout ICE. Every agent would have to undergo intensive 40-hour training on constitutional rights and proper investigation conduct. Any attempt to detain or interrogate an American citizen without probable cause would be treated as serious misconduct, with possibility of immediate dismissal. ICE would be required to create a public database of complaints against agents, allowing patterns of problematic behavior to be identified earlier. The part of the settlement related to Citizens for Legal Immigration was even more satisfying. The organization was forced to shut down its reporting website, delete all data they had collected on lawyers, and publish a public statement admitting their activities had resulted in illegal harassment of legal professionals. The organization's leaders were personally named in the settlement and prohibited from creating any similar entity in the future. If they violated this order, they would be subject to criminal contempt of court charges. It was a complete dismantling of an operation that had caused terror in immigrant communities for years. Morrison called it putting cockroaches in the sunlight so everyone could see how disgusting they really were. Diana accepted the settlement, but not for the money. She accepted it because the policy changes meant other lawyers, other citizens, would have protections that didn't exist before that terrible day in March. She used part of her settlement to create a foundation that offers free legal support to professionals facing government harassment based on discrimination. The foundation has already helped 127 people in its first 2 years, from lawyers to doctors, teachers, and social workers who were targeted for defending marginalized communities. Diana said in an interview that if something good had to come out of the worst day of her life, it would be ensuring the next person had the resources to fight back. Morrison retired 2 years after the settlement, at 60, but not before personally training a new generation of civil rights lawyers at his firm. He says the Diana Chen case was the most important of his 4-decade career, not because he won the biggest settlement or became famous, but because it proved the system can still work when courageous people refuse to back down. In his retirement speech, he told a story about that day in the lobby, about how he wasn't sure he could stop those agents, but knew he had to try. He said every lawyer faces that moment at least once in their career, that moment where you have to decide whether to stay quiet or stand up, even when it's scary. The security cameras that captured everything are still operational at Morrison & Associates. The video from that day has been transformed into training material used in dozens of law schools across the country. Students watch Morrison blocking that hallway, citing the Constitution with absolute authority, and learn that knowing the law isn't enough, you have to have the courage to defend it when authorities try to trample it. The video has over 15 million views across various platforms, and the comments are always the same. People wish they had lawyers like Morrison. People admire Diana for transforming trauma into action. People celebrate that. At least this time, justice prevailed. Rickman never got another job in law enforcement. His name is permanently associated with the case, and any quick Google search brings up dozens of articles about his civil rights violations. He tried to sue Morrison for defamation, claiming the leaked video ruined his life, but the case was immediately dismissed. You can't sue someone for defamation when the truth is recorded in high-definition video. Some people feel sorry for him, say one mistake shouldn't define someone's entire life. But Diana disagrees. She says it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. He chose to ignore the law. He chose to intimidate. He chose to assume she didn't belong, and choices have consequences. Citizens for Legal Immigration completely disappeared after the settlement. Their website is offline, their social media profiles deleted, their leaders silent. But the damage they caused echoed for years. Of the 23 victims represented in the class action, 5 had temporarily left immigration law practice out of fear. All returned after the settlement, strengthened by the knowledge that the system eventually protected them. Diana still keeps in touch with many of them. They formed a kind of involuntary family, people united by shared trauma and shared victory. They meet annually on the anniversary of the settlement, not to celebrate what happened, but to remember why they keep fighting. So, what's the real lesson here? It's not just about a law firm defending its employee. It's about what happens when people with power decide they can ignore constitutional rights, and what happens when courageous people say no. It's about how security cameras and transparency can hold even federal agents accountable. It's about how hate groups weaponize government systems, and how we can dismantle them when the light shines bright enough. And it's about a lawyer who just wanted to do her job, but instead became a symbol of resistance and dignity in the face of injustice. Diana continues working at Morrison & Associates to this day. She still defends immigrant families. She still fights impossible cases. And now, when federal agents show up, they know exactly who she is, what she represents, and that violating her rights or her clients' rights will cost them their careers. Sometimes justice really wins, and when it wins, the victory needs to be so visible, so indisputable, that no one dares commit the same mistake again.